Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. My name is Jim Yonley. I'm chairman of the Traditional Republicans for Common Sense. You may not know much about that group, and I'll tell you, it started about a little over 2 years ago when I was watching some Republican candidates on TV, and the only words that seemed to strike home to me were conservative, conservative, conservative. And I thought, I think there's more to governmental service than just trying to be the most conservative person. So I called a good friend of mine, Dick Bond, a former state senator, and said, are you watching this? What do you think? He said, oh, it's awful. I said, I don't agree with all that. I said, well, let's do something about it. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know, but let's start by calling a few of our friends. We may be the only two guys in the state of Kansas who feel this way. Well, to make what could be a long story somewhat shorter, we started calling former colleagues of ours in the legislature, limiting our contact to former legislators, and before long we had not only 20 or 30, but 40 or 50 and 60, and we sort of topped out about a year ago at around 70-some members. And these are all former legislators. Collectively, we had over 700 years of legislative service as elected Republicans. So among our group, we have 4 former speakers of the House, 4 former presidents of the Senate, several majority leaders, and so forth. Our people have been leaders in this body, in this chamber, in this House, in this building. And they have been leaders, and they've recognized leadership, and that's why we're here today to talk about Greg Orman. I have a prepared statement which I've distributed to you, but for the record, I'll read it. The Board of Directors of Traditional Republicans for Common Sense has reviewed the qualifications of many candidates for office in the coming election. As a result of that review, we believe Greg Orman is the best qualified candidate for the office of United States Senator from Kansas. Furthermore, we find his views to be very much in line with the goals of Traditional Republicans for Common Sense. End of quote. That's our message from the group. We have 2 members here today who would like to tell you about their particular individual feelings, and I'll let them have the podium. Go ahead.
Good morning. I am former Senator Tim Owens, served 4 years in the Senate here and 7 years in the House. I have been a lifelong Republican. I was delighted when I heard about the Traditional Republicans for Common Sense forming and that they asked me to be a member of that group. And it was because I felt that the Republican Party that has been elected in this state has drifted a long way from what the Traditional Republicans stand for. And in so doing, I also began to look at the people that we have elected, and I wasn't very happy with what I was seeing. Then along came an individual who identified himself as an independent. And I didn't know Greg Orman at that time, so I decided that in good keeping with trying to find out who these folks are that are running, I wanted to interview him, and I did. And I found out that Greg Orman and I agree on almost every aspect of our political persuasion. And that has to do with a conservative, in the terms of Traditional Republicans, view of fiscal matters, and a more moderate and tolerant view of social issues. I believe that Greg Orman stands for those things, and I also believe that if he were to go to Washington, he would be able to work across the aisle with both sides of the political spectrum. Right now, we are at a loss in this country, and we are at a loss in this state, and it's because the extremists in both ends are running things. The extremists are running the state, the extremists are running the national, and I have been a centrist my entire life. I believe that the only way that we are going to get back to common sense is by pulling us back toward the center. Let me use a brief example. It's an old Navy example. I'm an Army guy, but I'll use a Navy example. When the ship lists too far one way or the other, it'll go in circles. and it'll never arrive at a destination. But if you keep the rudder amidship, it'll go straight and narrow and get to its destination. I believe that Greg Orman, in his philosophy and in his approach, can work with both sides in Washington, and that's why I'm supporting him. I supported Pat Roberts for many years because I thought that that's where he was. But Pat Roberts has drifted far, far, far to the right, and I can no longer support him because of that. So with that, I was proud to be here and proud to be asked to be a part of a group that would be here to endorse and support Greg Orman, and I will continue to do that through the election. Thank you.
Good morning. I see quite a few familiar faces around here that I didn't know whether anybody was still around that I have known in the past. I'm Rochelle Chronister from Neodesha. I am a former chairman of the Kansas Republican Party. I was in the House for 17 years, and my duties included chairing the Appropriations and the Education Committee. I've known Greg Orman for about a year and a half before he decided to take on this battle. And I think we all recognize it's going to be a battle. But as I looked around at what it was that was happening in our United States Congress and read a few things about what people were saying about it, it turns out that this is the most do-nothing Congress ever. And that is shown by the number of bills that has passed, the fact that they can't even pass their appropriations. And as an old appropriations person, that makes me kind of crazy along the way. And that the reason is there is no agreement to come together and figure out what's best for this country. The Democrats in charge of the Senate, the Republicans in charge of the House, and nobody wants to talk to each other in a reasonable manner. You have to be reasonable and come together on what it is can happen. I believe that Greg Orman is that kind of a person. He is a pragmatist, he is a problem solver, and his decision to run was mainly based on the fact that he believes that there should be a centrist kind of an agreement, and he would like to help make that centrist kind of agreement take place. You can ask him about what his positions are, and I think you'll find that he is fiscally conservative and is socially tolerant. That fits in quite well with the way that I have felt about things for a long time, and I am proud to stand here and to support him for the United States Senate. Greg Orman.
Good morning. First, I'd just like to say thank you to the traditional Republicans for common sense, to Jim Yonley, Tim Owens, and Rochelle Chronister for being here today as representatives of that organization. I am grateful and frankly humbled by their support. This is an organization that is filled with leaders who led at a time when Kansas followed a much more moderate problem-solving tradition. They're leaders who ultimately figured out how to get things done, how to grow our state, how to create communities that people wanted to live and work in. And so I'm privileged and honored and humbled to accept their endorsement today as we try to take their method of pragmatic problem solving to Washington. At this point, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, as are the three members of the traditional Republicans who are here with me today.
Yeah, Jim, you got a website that lists everybody who's a member.
We have a website. It's not very active. I apologize for it. The memo that I gave you has my email address on it, and any questions you have, I'd be happy to respond to them if you could use that.
I've noticed a change in terminology. It used to be independent, now it's centrist. Tell me,
Yeah, just so we're clear, I don't know that you've noticed a change in terminology from me. I am fiscally responsible and socially tolerant, but most importantly, consider myself an independent, pragmatic problem solver, and that's the language that we're using to describe our campaign.
but the people who've actually been elected to things say centrist.
I think centrist is a position. Independent is a title.
Mr. Orman, what are the key issues in the Senate race that you think are going to move voters one way or another?
Well, you know, I think voters in Kansas are frustrated. I think they look at what's going on in Washington today and they realize that as a country we're ignoring our problems, that we're not getting things done. And that transcends many issues that they feel are important to them. The issues we're talking about in the campaign are things like higher education and healthcare affordability, both issues that I think have been largely ignored over the course of the last decade. We're talking a lot about immigration reform, and I realize that in some cases that's considered a difficult topic to discuss, but it's a serious issue that we have as a country, and it's an issue that we think that if you're going to demonstrate true public service, you have to be willing to talk about that issue. And another issue that we spend a lot of time talking about is what I call the new American paradox. And in my mind, it's harder than ever for the average American to get ahead, and yet paradoxically easier to do nothing with your life. And so we're talking about how we re-examine the social safety net for able-bodied adults, try to build better pathways back to work for them, and at the same time invest in at-risk kids so that we can break the cycle of poverty once and for all.
Yeah, but Greg, the argument that, say, somebody like Pat Roberts makes is the problem is that you have Republicans in control of the House and Democrats in control of the Senate. If Republicans win control of the Senate, then you have Republicans and Republicans, and they will pass bills that will do things that so why isn't that necessarily the solution?
Well, I understand that argument. What I will say is, regardless of what happens in the fall, we are going to have divided government for the next 2 years. And what we really need to do is send a message to those folks in Washington that we want problem solvers there, that we want people who are generally going to work across the aisle in the tradition of Bob Dole and Nancy Kassenbaum to get things done in Washington. And I think that that's much more likely to happen if Kansas sends a message to the rest of the country that enough is enough with this partisan bickering.
Okay, but one of the most consequential votes that any senator is going to take is right off the bat, elect the majority, because that's what sets the agenda for at least the next 2 years. You said you won't make that decision until after you see how all the other states vote and figure out who's in the majority and you vote with them. Why should voters in Kansas surrender that option to you and surrender it to the other states?
Yeah, what I have said, to be very clear on that matter, is that if I get elected, there is a fair chance that neither party in Washington will have a majority. And if neither party has a majority in Washington, I think that's a great opportunity for the state of Kansas to define the agenda in the Senate. For us to say to both sides, we want you to support a pro-problem solving agenda. And by the way, I don't think we have to wait 2 years to change our mind. If we get 4 or 5 months into this and it's clear that the party that we've selected to be in the majority isn't walking the talk, isn't solving problems, isn't moving past partisanship, we can change our allegiance and caucus with the other party. And I think that's a tool to create accountability that we haven't seen in the Senate in a long time.
Are you still undecided about which party you're going to caucus with?
Again, what I've said is we're going to go and we're going to talk to both parties if we're in that position where we're deciding who is in the majority, and we're going to say, here's the agenda that we care about. We need to address higher education and healthcare affordability. We need to address tax code simplification. We need to put our country on a much firmer footing long run. And if you're willing to embrace this agenda, we're willing to consider caucusing with you. Now, if one party is clearly in the majority over the other, I think what makes sense for the state of Kansas is for me to caucus with the majority. And I will tell you, I'm the only senator running in this race who can guarantee you that they'll be caucusing with the majority.
Greg, is it time for Chad Taylor to drop out?
You know, we've always thought that this was going to be a race with 4 candidates on the ballot in November. And above all else, I believe in our democracy, and I believe that people who want to run for office and are legally entitled to be on the ballot should be able to run for the office. So we're taking our message to the people of Kansas. We believe that we are going to win in November regardless of who is on the ballot on November 4th. And we believe that Kansans are really responding to our message.
I gotta ask Tim or Michelle this. He's given money to Hillary and Barack before. In the past with Republicans, even if it's $2, it's qualified. You're comfortable with it?
I'm comfortable with that, yes. I have given money to Democrats. I don't think that disqualifies me for being a Republican. And I think that Greg has chosen the path of making a decision on the basis of the qualifications of the candidates that he supports. And I think you would find that he has supported many other kinds of independent candidates also across the country in some of the organizations that he's been involved with. I don't have any problem. I want the best person there for the job.
Have you given money in the past to Pat Roberts?
I have. I have been a supporter of Pat Roberts since he ran for Congress the very first time. I'm crazy about Pat Roberts, but I think the only way that this country can change is to change what it is that is actually happening through the people who are there.
Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your time and again appreciate the traditional Republicans for their support.
I just dwelled on the